The Adventures of Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain and read by Ngamoko Nikora. Part 6, Chapter 28. The old man reports. Hope begins to weaken. The next day was Sunday. In the very early morning, Huck called gently at the old man's door. "Please, let me come in. It is only Huck Finn." "That name will open this door night or day, boy." These were strange words to the boy's ears. He could not remember hearing any so kind and pleasant before. The door was quickly opened, and he entered. "Now, boy, I hope that you are hungry, because as soon as the sun is up, we shall have something hot to eat. We hoped that you would come here again last night." "When I heard the guns, I ran. I ran for 3 miles. I came now because I want to know what happened. I came before daylight because I do not want to meet those men, living or dead." "They are not dead, boy. We are sorry for that. They heard us coming and they ran. Then we went down to the village to get help. Men have gone to watch at the river. More men will hunt through the forest today. My sons will join them. I wish we had seen those 2 men. Could you see them in the dark?"
"I can tell you about them. One is a man that you have seen in the village. He has long white hair. He can't hear and he can't talk."
Then he told about the other man's face and clothes.
When his sons had gone, Mr. Jones asked Huck why he had followed the men up the hill. Huck told, after much thought, that one man was Indian Joe, but he did not tell about the box of money. Soon people began coming to the house, and Huck went where they could not see him. Mrs. Douglas was among the first to come. She came to thank Mr. Jones for saving her from being hurt by the men. "You should not thank me," he said. "There is another person who did more to help you, but he does not want thanks." All the people in the village went to church early that day. They wanted to talk about the 2 bad men. The 2 had not been found, and nothing had been learned about where they had gone. Leaving the church, Mrs. Thatcher walked beside Mrs. Harper. She said, "Is my Becky going to sleep all day?" "Your Becky?" "Yes, she stayed with you last night, I believe."
"No."
Mrs. Thatcher stopped suddenly. She seemed ill. At that moment, Aunt Polly joined them. She said, "Good morning, Mrs. Thatcher. Good morning, Mrs. Harper. I suppose that my Tom stayed with Fred or Joe last night without telling me, and now he is afraid to come to church." Mrs. Thatcher seemed more ill than before. She moved her head, saying no. "He did not stay with us," said Mrs. Harper. Her face showed surprise and a little fear. Aunt Polly also showed fear. "Joe Harper," she said, "have you seen my Tom this morning?" "No." "When did you see him last?" But Joe could not remember. People had stopped moving out of the church. The story travelled quickly among them. Children were questioned. No child could remember seeing Becky and Tom on the returning riverboat. It was dark then. No person had thought of counting the group. A young man now said that Tom and Becky might be lost in the cave. Mrs. Thatcher closed her eyes tightly. Aunt Polly began to weep. Within 5 minutes, bells were ringing and all the people were gathering. What had happened at Mrs. Douglas's house was not important now. In half an hour, 200 men were going either by river or by road toward the cave. Through the long afternoon, the village seemed dead. Many women went to visit Aunt Polly and Mrs. Thatcher. They wept with them, and that was more help than words. Through the long night, the town waited for news, but in the morning, only this news came. Send more food and more lights. Mrs. Thatcher was almost ill, and Aunt Polly also. Old Mr. Jones came home from the cave at noon and discovered that Huck was sick. Mrs. Douglas came to care for him. Other men began to return from the cave, but the stronger men continued their hunt. They visited the farther parts of the cave. They shouted and they shot guns, but they had no answer. Often a light would be seen far away, and they would think that the children were found. But the light always belonged to another of the hunters. The names Becky and Tom were found marked on a rock, and the string that had tied Becky's hair was found. 3 days and nights passed. Huck asked about Tom Sawyer. Mrs. Douglas said, "Quiet, child, you must not talk. You are very, very sick." She began to weep. There were not many now with enough hope or strength to continue hunting for Tom Sawyer. Chapter 29. Lost in the cave, found but not saved. Tom and Becky had started through the branching cave with the other children. Then they had enough of the games with the others. They had walked farther, talking and reading the writing on the walls. People had put their names there. Tom and Becky also put their names on the wall. They came to a place where a small stream of water fell over the rocks. Tom went behind the waterfall to let his light shine through for Becky's pleasure. Behind this waterfall, Tom found an opening leading down, and he wanted to discover where this branch of the cave went. He made a mark on the wall to guide the return and started down with Becky following. They continued farther and farther, making marks where they turned into a new branch and discovering many wonderful new parts of the cave. One great room was full of hundreds of bats, which were hanging asleep on the walls. When the children entered, the bats came flying at the lights, and the children ran. They came to a dark lake and sat down at the edge. Now, for the first time, they felt the deep quiet of the place. Becky said, "It is a very long time since I heard the others." "Becky, we are far below them, and far north or south or east or west. We can't hear them here." Becky was afraid. "We should return. Can you find the way, Tom?" "I think that I can, but there are those bats. A different way would be better."
We must not get lost. It would be fearful." They started, but every turn now seemed strange. Becky's tears began to fall. They stopped. Tom shouted. The answer was a deep quiet. It increased Becky's fear, and Tom began now to feel afraid. Becky said, "We must return to the lake and then go through the room full of bats. It will be better than being lost." But Tom said, "Becky, I have been a fool." He had not remembered to make any marks. He had not expected to return to the lake. "Tom, Tom, we are lost. We are lost. We never can get out of this fearful place. Oh, why did we leave the others?" She dropped to the ground and wept so loudly that Tom feared that she might die. He sat down beside her and put his arms around her. He said that he was sorry, that he should never have brought her so far into the cave. Then she said that she also had been wrong. They had both been wrong to come so far. They started to walk again. Each had a light. Now they decided to use only one light and to save the other. They walked until they could go no farther without resting. They talked of home and their friends and their beds, and they talked of sunlight. Becky's tears started again, and then she was asleep. Tom watched her. Slowly her face grew peaceful, and then he felt some peace. She opened her eyes, laughing, but suddenly the laugh ended. "Oh, I wish that I had never opened my eyes again. Oh, Tom, do not look at me like that. I shall not say that again." "We are going to find the way," Tom said. "We are going to try." They rose and started to walk, hand in hand and without hope. Tom said that they must go quietly and listen for falling water. They found it and sat down to rest again. Becky said, "Tom, I am hungry." Tom had saved a piece of the picnic cake. He took it from his pocket and divided it. They had cold water to drink. After eating and drinking, Becky was ready to move again. But Tom said, "Becky, I must tell you, our light is almost finished. We must stay here, where there is water." Again, Becky wept. Then a new thought came to her. "Tom, they will hunt for us. Perhaps they are hunting for us now. When would they discover that we were not with the others on the boat?" "It will be dark on the boat, but your mother will know that you have not come home." Now Tom learned that Mrs. Thatcher did not expect Becky to return home that night. Then their last light failed, and darkness was complete. Becky wept a long time in Tom's arms. Neither knew how long she wept. Then both opened their eyes in the darkness and knew that they had been sleeping. Again, they did not know how much time had passed. Tom said that it might be Sunday. It might be a day later. But Becky would not talk. Her hopes were gone. The hours passed. They were hungry again. Tom had saved most of his share of the cake. He divided it. Then they heard a sound like a distant shout.
Tom answered. It came again. They started moving carefully toward it, but they arrived at an edge of rock where the floor fell away. They could go no farther. They listened. The distant shout was now more distant, and then they did not hear it again. They returned to the place where they had water to drink. Time passed. After sleeping again, when they opened their eyes, they thought that another day must have passed. They were very hungry. Tom had a new idea. The cave had many small branches near them. Tom decided to learn about them. That would be better than sitting and doing nothing. He had some string in his pocket. He tied an end of this to a rock near the little waterfall. Then he and Becky started to walk carefully away. They let the string fall behind them. It would be a guide for their return. After 20 steps, they came to a hole in the rock floor. Tom went down on his knees and felt below. Then he put his hands and his head as far as possible around the corner to look. At that moment, a human hand holding a light appeared from behind a rock not far away. Tom shouted. At once a body followed the hand. It was Indian Joe. Tom could not move because of fear. He was deeply thankful to see Indian Joe run away. He did not tell Becky what he had seen or why he had shouted. They returned to the waterfall, but after another long wait and another sleep, Tom decided to try moving again. They were very hungry now. He thought that perhaps a week had passed. Becky was not strong enough to go with him. She asked him to return often. She also asked him to return when all hope was gone, and to hold her hand until she died. Tom promised. He kissed her. Then, with the string in his hand, he started on his hands and knees through one of the openings in the rock. He was sick with fear, and he had no hope. Chapter 30. Tom tells the story of their escape. Sunday and 2 more days had passed. Few of the men continued their hunt in the cave. Most of the people believed that the children could never be found. Mrs. Thatcher was very ill. Aunt Polly's hair had changed from grey to white. Then in the middle of the night, the village bells began to ring. In a moment the streets were filled with people shouting, "They are found! They are found!" All moved toward the river and met the children as they were carried home. Aunt Polly's happiness was complete. Mrs. Thatcher's happiness would be complete when the news reached her husband. He was yet in the cave, continuing the hunt. Tom lay on a bed telling the story of his wonderful adventures. He had gone in one direction as far as the length of the string. Then he had tried another opening. Then he had tried a third. He was ready to try another when he saw a distant light. He thought it was daylight. He dropped the string and ran toward it and put his head out through a small hole. And there was the great river on which the boat had brought them to the picnic. He told how he then returned for Becky. She did not believe him. She told him to let her die. But after a while she went with him. When she saw the daylight, she almost died of joy. He told her how he got himself through the hole and then helped her. They saw some men in a boat and shouted. At first the men did not believe their wild story, because the men said, "You are 5 miles south of the door of the cave." But they believed the children after a while and took them to a house where they were given food and allowed to rest before being taken home. It was several days before Tom and Becky were strong again. Tom learned of Huck's sickness and went to visit him. Mrs. Douglas would not let Tom talk about his adventures because Huck was not strong enough to listen. Also, she would not let the boys talk about what had happened at her house on Cardiff Hill. Tom learned about that at home. He heard also that the other man who had been with Indian Joe had been found in the river. He had drowned while trying to escape. About 2 weeks later, Tom visited Becky at home. Judge Thatcher and some friends were there. They asked Tom if he wished to go into the cave again. Tom said yes. Others might wish to go also, the judge said, but I had that door covered with iron, and now it is closed. It can't be opened. No person will get lost in that cave again. "Oh, Judge," Tom said, "Indian Joe is in the cave." Chapter 31. What happened to Indian Joe? A return to the cave. The news spread. In a few minutes, men were in boats on their way to the cave. Tom was in the boat with Judge Thatcher. When the door was opened, their eyes saw a sad sight. Indian Joe was on the ground, dead. Tom's experience in the cave made him understand Indian Joe's sufferings. But a heavy weight of fear had been lifted from Tom's heart. The next morning, Tom and Huck had an important talk. Now Huck told Tom about following Indian Joe up the hill to Mrs. Douglas's house. This part of the story was new to Tom, and Indian Joe came from number 2 in that public house, Huck said. And now we shall never know any more about that box of money. "Huck," Tom said, "that money was never in number 2. Huck, it is in the cave." "Say that again, Tom." "The money is in the cave." "Tom, is this true?" "It is, Huck. Will you go there with me and help to bring it out?" "I will, if we can go into the cave and not get lost." "Are you strong enough?" Tom asked. "I can't walk more than a mile, Tom." "It is 5 miles, Huck, for any other person. But I know a shorter way. I will take you there in a boat. It will be easy for you." "I want to start now, Tom." Tom agreed. "We want some bread and meat and our tobacco, and 2 bags, and some string, and some lights." They took a friend's boat, and about noon the boys started their journey. Tom knew where to stop. They pulled the boat up on the shore. "Huck,
The hole is near. Try to find it."
Huck tried and found nothing. Then Tom proudly took him among some trees and said,
"Here it is."
The boys entered the hole. Tom was leading. They tied their string to a rock to guide their return. A few steps took them to the little waterfall, and Tom felt his whole body shaking. He told Huck that this was where he and Becky had been when they were lost. The boys were very quiet now. The stillness and the darkness were heavy on their hearts. They continued walking, and soon they came to the place where the floor seemed to end. With the light, they could see that they were on a hill leading to another rock floor below. Tom said, "Now I will show you something, Huck." He held his light high. "Look as far as you can around the corner. Do you see that? On the big rock?" "Tom, it is a cross." "That is where I saw Indian Joe, Huck." "And where is number 2? Remember what he said?" "Under the cross." Huck said in a shaking voice, "Tom, I want to go away from here." "What? And leave the money?" "Yes, leave it. Indian Joe's spirit is there." "No, Huck. His spirit is near the door where he died. That is 5 miles away." "No, Tom. It would guard the money. I know about spirits, and you do also." Tom began to think that Huck was right. But then he had a different thought. "Huck, his spirit would not be near a cross." Huck agreed. "Tom, I do not think of that, but it is true. We must go down there and find the box." It was not easy to go down the hill of rock to the floor below. Tom went first and Huck followed. Near the bottom of the great rock, the boys found where some person had been eating and sleeping, but they found no money. Then Tom took his knife and used it to turn over the earth behind the great rock. The knife touched wood. "Huck! Do you hear that?" He pulled away some stones and some old boards. Behind these there was an opening under the rock. With his light, Tom went down. Huck followed. Tom went around a corner and shouted, "Huck! Look here!" It was the box of money. There were also 2 guns. "We have it," said Huck, putting his hands among the pieces of gold. "We are rich, Tom." "Huck, I was always sure that we would get it, and we have it." "Can I lift the box?" He could lift it, but he could not carry it. They put the money in their 2 bags and carried it up from the hole under the rock. "Now, we want the guns," said Huck. "No, Huck, leave them there. We will return and use them some other time. I think it is late, and I am hungry. We can eat and smoke outside in the boat." After eating and smoking, they returned up the river. It was dark when they arrived at the edge of the village. "Huck," said Tom, "we will take the money to Mrs. Douglas's house. I know a place near there to leave it tonight. Tomorrow morning we can count it and divide it, and then we can find a place in the forest where it will be safe. You wait here now and watch it. I am going to get Benny Taylor's little wagon." He soon returned with the wagon. They put the bags of money in the wagon. and started toward Cardiff Hill. Near Mr. Jones's house, they stopped to rest. Mr. Jones came out. "Who is there?" he said. "Huck and Tom Sawyer." "Come with me, boys. They are all waiting for you. Let me pull your wagon." "It is very heavy." "What do you have in it?" "Nothing of value, I am sure of that. Boys will always work for things of no worth. Hurry now." The boys wanted to know why they should hurry. "You will learn when you arrive." Soon they were entering Mrs. Douglas's house, leaving the wagon near the door. All the important people of the village were there. The Thatchers were there, the Harpers, Aunt Polly, Sid, Mary, and many more. All were dressed in their best clothes. Tom and Huck were covered with earth from the cave. Aunt Polly's face was red when she saw Tom's face and clothes. Mrs. Douglas took the boys to a bedroom and said, "Wash and dress now. Here are new clothes for both of you. Come and join the others when you are ready." Chapter 32. Mr. Jones's surprise fails. Huck said, "Tom, we can run away. We can go through the window." "Why do you want to run away?" "I can't join that crowd, Tom." "Oh, that is nothing to be afraid of. I will take care of you." Sid appeared. "Sid, why are all these people here?" "Old Mr. Jones has a surprise, but it won't surprise many people. Most of us know it already." "What is the surprise, Sid?" "It is about Huck following Indian Joe and the other man to this house." "But it won't be a surprise. You will see." He laughed. "Some person told about it." Tom said, "You told. There is only one person in this town who would destroy a good surprise. You. Now go away, or I will throw you out of this room." Some minutes later, Huck and Tom were eating at a big table with the others. Then Mr. Jones stood up to speak. He told the story about Huck. It was true that it did not seem much like a surprise, but people tried to seem surprised. Mrs. Douglas thanked Huck again and again. She said that she would give Huck a room in her house and send him to school, and that later she would give him money to start a business. Tom said, "Huck won't need it. He is rich." People tried not to laugh. Tom said, "Huck has money. Perhaps you do not believe it, but he has. I can show you." He ran outside. "What is Tom doing now?" said Aunt Polly. "I never can understand that boy." Tom entered, carrying the heavy bags. He opened them, and he let the yellow gold fall out on the table. "What did I tell you?" he said. "Half is Huck's and half is mine." All looked. None could speak for a moment. Then they asked Tom to explain. It was a long story, but it was full of interest. When Tom finished, Mr. Jones said, "I planned a surprise for this evening, but this surprise makes mine seem very small." The money was counted. There was more than $12,000. Some of the village people owned land and were much richer than Tom and Huck, but none had ever before seen so much money at one time. Chapter 33. New Adventures Planned. Tom's and Huck's money was a great wonder in the poor little village. The reader may be sure of that. It was not easy to believe that the money was real. People talked and talked about it. People went hunting for more money. Boys went, and men went also. They hunted in every old, lonely house. All watched Tom and Huck and listened to them. Every word they spoke had become important. The village newspaper had a story about them. Mrs. Douglas put Huck's money in a bank. Judge Thatcher did the same with Tom's. Each boy had money to spend now. He had almost $1 for every day of the year. In those days, $1 had a quarter a week was enough to buy a boy's food and clothes and to pay for his schooling. Judge Thatcher had a good opinion of Tom. He said that only a very wise boy could have brought Becky out of the cave safely. He expected Tom to become a great man. Huck Finn's life had changed. His sufferings were almost too great for him. Mrs. Douglas had taken him to her home. She kept him clean. He must sleep every night in a clean bed. He must eat like a gentleman. He must go to church. He suffered for 3 weeks, and then the next day he was gone. Mrs. Douglas and all the people in the village tried to find him. They were afraid that he had drowned in the river. Early on the 3rd morning, Tom Sawyer went to an old building outside the village. He found Huck. Huck had been sleeping behind the building. He was lying there now, happily smoking. He was covered with dust. His hair was wild. He was wearing his old clothes. Tom asked him to go home to Mrs. Douglas. Huck's face became sad. He said, "Do not talk about it, Tom. I tried it. It is not for me. She is good to me and friendly, but I can't live with her. I must get up at the same time every morning. I must wash. I must sleep in a bed. I must wear those good clothes. I can't move in those clothes. I can't sit down. I can't lie down. I can't roll on the ground in them. I must go to church. I must wear shoes on Sunday." "We all live like that, Huck." "Tom, I am different. I can't live like that. It is easy to get food. Mrs. Douglas won't let me smoke, and she prays all the time. I had to leave, Tom, or I would die. And when school begins, I would have to go to school." "Tom, being rich is no good. I wish I was dead all the time. I like these old clothes. I like this place to sleep. This is what I want. Tom, I give you my share of the money. You can give me 10 cents when I need it, but not often. I do not like what is easy to get. And you go now and explain to Mrs. Douglas." "Oh, Huck, you know that I can't do that. And if you try longer, you will like it." "Like it? Yes, I will like it as I would like a burning coal if I sat on it." "No, Tom. I won't be rich, and I won't live in a house. I like the forest and the river, and a place like this for sleeping. But now we are rich, and all our games like being pirates are destroyed." "Listen, Huck, being rich won't change that." "Is that true, Tom?" "It is true, but if you want to join me and the other boys and belong to my club, you must live like us." "Tom, is that friendly?" "I want you to join us, Huck, but all the boys who join Tom Sawyer's club must have good characters." Huck was quiet. There was a battle in his mind. After a while he said, "I will return to Mrs. Douglas for a month. I will try, if you will let me belong to Tom Sawyer's club." "I agree, Huck. Come with me now, and I promise to ask Mrs. Douglas to change a little, Huck." "Will you, Tom? That is good. When will you start your club?" "Oh, soon. This evening, perhaps, we can have the first meeting. What will we do at the meeting? We will promise always to help each other, and promise never to tell what we plan to do, and promise to kill any person who hurts one of us. I like that, Tom. I like it. And we must make those promises in the middle of the night, in a lonely place, and sign with blood. This is better than being a pirate, Tom. I will stay with Mrs. Douglas, and we will have adventures that will make the whole village talk about us. And then Mrs. Douglas will be proud because she took me into her home. Chapter 34. A few words to end. So ends the story, because it is the story of a boy. It must stop here. It could not go much further without becoming the history of a man. Most of the people in this book are living yet, and are happy. Perhaps someday the story will be continued. Therefore, it will be wise to tell no more now. The end of part 6, and the end of this beautiful story, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, by Mark Twain, and read by Ngamoko Nikora. I sincerely hope that you enjoyed listening to this story, because it's such a beautiful story, and there's so many images that can be conjured up in one's mind. Thank you. Thank you very much for listening.